movies.
The Year of Return, Ghana 2019, is a momentous spiritual and birthright journey, inviting the global African family, home and abroad, to the West African country. It aims to mark 400 years of the arrival of the first enslaved Africans in Jamestown, Virginia. That discussion is coming up right here on Straight Talk Africa. Hello and welcome to Straight Talk Africa, live from the Voice of America headquarters here in Washington. I'm Peter Clottey, sitting in for Shaka Sali. Today, we are discussing the Year of Return to Ghana. 2019 marks the 400th anniversary of the first enslaved Africans to be brought to what is now the United States. In Ghana, the anniversary has been dubbed the Year of Return, and the country is welcoming the African diaspora with expedited visas and numerous events to discover their roots, even if they don't know their lineage is Ghanaian. Isha Sarai went to the Ghanaian capital, Accra, to speak with some of the people bridging the gap between the continents.
I don't specifically know exactly where I would have been from in Africa.
I've always assumed that I'm West African.
The biannual Panafest in Ghana celebrates the idea of Pan-Africanism. But this year, the festival takes on a new meaning as Ghana welcomes members of the African diaspora, many of whom don't know where their ancestors came from before being enslaved, to discover their roots.
For me, it's a trip of a lifetime. So I've always fixated on Ghana as a place that I wanted to visit for a long time.
It's amazing to begin to reconnect with family, if you will, and seeing people leave from all over the world.
His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Ghana, Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, declared 2019 as the Year of Return for all African Americans and Africans in the diaspora.
When I look at Pan-Africanism, I look at it from the context of unity.
Gail McCoy, who moved to Ghana from the U.S., heads Ghana's African American Association.
We are all part of the black race. We are all Africans, right? Whether you're an African in America, whether you're an African in Brazil, whether you're African in the Caribbean, if you have a high level of melanin in your skin, you are from Africa.
Nkoy has been working with Ghanaians and other Americans living in Ghana to organize a year of events commemorating African unity on the continent and among the diaspora. Many of the attendees say they were pleasantly surprised by how Accra has shattered their stereotypes of the African continent.
A lot of the personas, a lot of the concepts, perceptions, even the African Americans, black folks in America think about Africa, right? So that it's all Sudan, it's all jungle, and which is not the case.
In addition to events in Ghana's capital, a big part of the Year of Return involves traveling to Cape Coast to see the notorious castle used in the transatlantic slave trade. Now a museum showcasing the plight of enslaved Africans before they were taken from the continent forever.
When they come to this place, it's like a pilgrimage, because to many of them, they can only come here once in a lifetime. So when they come here, this place is very important to them, very emotional.
The sense of pilgrimage is felt by many visitors.
It's just really amazing to see, this is happening at this point in history. And I mean, for me, it's the full circle of things coming to where they belong. And I feel really a strong sense of belonging here.
Isha Sarai, VOA News, Accra.
Thanks, Isha. Excellent reporting. Joining me today in Washington is His Excellency Barfour Adjei Barwuah, the Ghanaian ambassador to the United States. And from New York, we are joined by Reverend Dillon, co-convener of the Door of Our Return Foundation, an initiative to connect African Americans with their country of origin. Welcome to Straight Talk Africa.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
All right, wonderful. Mr. Ambassador, let me come to you. What has the year of return been for you and for your country, Ghana, as a whole?
Well, I believe, as a country, we looked at this issue of the year of return with regard to the fact that we have always considered, African Americans as brothers and sisters. Mm-hmm. So actually inviting them, in this year of return is essentially emphasizing the fact that we are family. And in fact, most of the time, when I meet a lot of African Americans in the streets, those that I talk to, I tell them that if they went to Ghana and they didn't speak first, somebody might speak a Ghanaian language to them because of the physical resemblance. But at least we are not so much celebrating the fact that people were taken from, Ghana or Africa generally, but we are celebrating the fact that these people left the shores of Africa under very difficult circumstances. They came to America and they had to work under very excruciating circumstances. They came to America, they had to get used to a language that they had never heard before. Mm-hmm. And in the process, they mastered the language, mastered it to the extent where they wrote books, sonnets and whatnot. And in fact, today, there are lots of them who are far more better exponents of this language than the native speakers do. And besides, in spite of all the difficulties in their economic existence, and in spite of the fact that the education that most of them got was nothing to write home about, they developed scientists, they developed educators and all that. And you recognize that there are lots of items in American civilization that could be attributed to the ingenuity and the invention of these people. Mm. So with regard to the year of return, we are saying that we are the same family split by this pond that is the Atlantic Ocean. We want to bridge the pond. We want people to come home. And in coming home, they should take a good look at the homes that they left, what the state is, and then take a good look at the prospects that we have so that they can also put in their bit to help the country develop. Besides everything, those people who came earlier and took whatever it is that they wanted to take, mm-hmm. and continue to take everything else, we never invited them. They came. So now we are inviting our kinsfolk that come and participate in the resurgence of your home. Mm. And if we were able to support others we never invited to be successful, yes, we see a reason why we should invite our own folks and help them to be successful, and in the process help the country to become the kind of country that we expect it to be. Mm.
Before I come to you, Reverend Dillon, Mr. Ambassador, how has been the interest of people in the diaspora, particularly here in the U.S., to return to Ghana?
Well, if the number of people who tell me that they are going to Ghana from here, from now to wherever, if the number of people who have been to Ghana within the past 3 months, if the number of visas we are issuing at the embassy is anything to go by, the interest is exceptionally high. I suspect that, in fact, we are becoming victims of our own success in promoting mm-hmm. Ghana as an investment destination, as a tourist destination, and then also at the home of all those in the diaspora. Mm. So it's been very good. The take-up has been exceptional. Mm.
Reverend Dillon, let me come to you in New York. How was your experience in Ghana? You just returned from Ghana. You took some people there in Ghana, in other countries. But what was your experience in Ghana, particularly with this year of return program or agenda by the Ghanaian government?
Well, I first really want to salute the President of Ghana for his leadership and for initiating this year of return movement. Interestingly enough, even a year prior, we have announced the door of our return movement in the U.S. and have been encouraging Africans across the United States and the Caribbean to certainly make this journey back to Africa, and Ghana being obviously one of those gateway countries that we think are really key to this process. The fact that Ghana was our first stop. The entire delegation, which included people like Dr. Julius Garvey, the son of the great Marcus Messiah Garvey, included Dr. Ron Daniels, the president for the Institute for the Black World 21st Century, people like George Fraser, Dr. George Fraser, the publisher, the author of Success Runs in Our Race, a New York Times bestseller, and one of the largest business networking institutions in the United States of America. When we got to Ghana, we landed, the music, the welcoming, the reception was just unbelievable, and it really started for us a 12-day journey that the 40 or so number of delegates that we took, they're still talking about it to this very day. So we're really energized by this journey, and for us it's not just a ceremonial trip back to Africa and to Ghana in specific and the other countries, but more so it is a new economic revolution for us. It's a new dynamics. It's a new journey for us to really begin to create the kind of linkages that needs to be created between Africans removed from the continent and the continent itself, so together we can really work for what I believe is an African renaissance.
Well, let me ask you, the narrative used to be that African Americans or Africans living here are not interested in going back, and they only go back to the continent when they are old and retired. What do you think is the surge in interest? What is contributing to the surge in interest at the moment?
Well, I think the surge is that which we are creating. The fact of the matter is that because there has been the stereotypes, because there has been this negative portrayal of Africa, you are correct. In a lot of sense, most of us traditionally and as we journey back, saw Africa as a place that we go for humanitarian causes, we go for safaris, as the case might be. We are now really painting a new picture. Yesterday we were at here in New York, the Ghanaian embassy, hosted by the Consul General here and a group of business leaders, including the president for the Ghanaian Chamber of Commerce, who was here in New York. And the conversation that we shared is, let's take what has been the year of return to the decade of our return, and through this, let's begin to create a movement where more Africans in America, and a part of our delegation also came from the Caribbean, because we really want to focus on the Americas and not just the United States of America, so that together we are really doing this journey back on a regular basis and make sure that we're putting on that agenda economic empowerment, economic development. How do we create business partnerships between Africans in the Americas and the continent itself, and Ghana in particular? So it's a journey for us. We're just energized. People like Attorney Eric Darko here in New York, who is one of the leaders. In fact, at our meeting with the president of Ghana, he appointed Eric Darko to be the liaison to ensure that this is not just a one-time 2019 journey, but it's a process around an economic revolution.
Well, let me come to you, Mr. Ambassador. Sure. The president made a promise of an agenda of Ghana Beyond Aid. Sure. How does this year of return program dovetail into his agenda of Ghana Beyond Aid?
Well, the thing is, where we are seriously promoting investments, from the states, and in particular from the African American community, the whole idea is to ensure that our economy is driven by genuine investment, which would obviously result in a fair return on a fair investment for those people who put their stakes in Ghana. And therefore, we are gradually trying to move away from subsisting on other people's other soft loans or grants or what have you, because we have the basis to generate the kind of economy that any country our size, could generate. Mm-hmm. And the fact of the matter is, Ghana is one of the few countries on this planet who actually have no reason whatsoever to be poor. So we are trying to make sure that with the year of return as the lead in, and I would want to emphasize that if we are celebrating 400 years of entry here, mm-hmm. there's no reason why we cannot mark the 401, 402, 403. So in fact, it dovetails into what the gentleman said, mm-hmm. that it has to be a certain continuous relationship, more geared towards making sure that we build the basis for a sustained economy for the benefit of all of us. Mm. So that is where our drive is. Mm. Expand the economy, put a lot of variety in the economy, make sure that everybody is in a position to participate, mm-hmm. improve on the socioeconomic being of everybody within the country, mm-hmm. because that is what good governance is all about. Mm-hmm. That is what development is all about. And I think in the effort, the whole problem of the, as it were, bad publicity that Africa has got and all that will need to be wiped out. I mean, I came to graduate school here, mm-hmm. and as soon as I was through with whatever qualifications I was pursuing, I decided to go home. And it was mainly because when I was leaving home, I was convinced, and I still feel that way, that Ghana could be a much better country than most of the countries on the planet. And that includes the states. It has a lot to do with size. But for our size, for whatever it is that we got in terms of physical endowment, and for whatever it is that we have in terms of human capital, we ought to do much better, and we are determined to do much better.
Has your government been able to put structures in place to meet some of these investors who want to invest in the country, to expedite the processes to ensure that they feel confident to invest in the country, to improve the living conditions of the average Ghanaian?
Sure. In fact, in Ghana, there isn't any aspect of intent to invest which cannot have, or which doesn't have, some kind of a setup to support whoever wants to invest. The Investment Promotion Council, for instance, is busy at work. Mm-hmm. Virtually every ministry has a lot to offer in terms of supporting people who are interested in the areas that they cover. Mm-hmm. The President's office has a Diaspora office, which also helps. The Tourism Authority does have a setup that is supposed to also support. So as far as we have it, and of course we are dynamic enough to ensure that if there are new issues that are coming up, we quickly find the support system to go with them. So in a way, we are more than prepared to ensure that anybody who is determined to be a bona fide investor cannot fall short, because we believe that we ought to make the system such that you have a fair investment, you have a fair return. The laws that we have do give considerable protection to investors. And in fact, with us, as long as you can prove that the exports you would want to make by way of money come out of very genuine profits that you've made, we don't have any restrictions whatsoever. Yeah.
Right. Reverend Dillon, let me come to you. As you were in the country I know things usually come up. Were some of the challenges you face expeditiously addressed by the authorities? And what is the feedback that you got from the people you took over there?
Well, the entire delegation is just overwhelmed by not just the Ghanaian people, but certainly the opportunities. Our trip, unlike, and we're looking at the numbers that it is probably about 1 million the visitors that have actually gone to Ghana this year. And again, that is commendable. Blacks being some of the most traveled people in the United States of America, it is good to know that there is this revival back to Africa. Very, very important journey. But I think it's important for us to understand that our focus was really about economic redemption. The fact that we had meetings not just with the president, we had meetings with the president, Yofi Grant, who heads up promotions and investments for Africa. We're talking for Ghana, that is, we're obviously talking to some of the business leaders that we took on the trip with us about what kind of opportunities are available. We were happy and excited to see the large number of African Americans who have actually moved to Ghana or moved back to Ghana and are building communities, building businesses in various parts of the country. For us, that is the kind of revival that really will bring about the economic transformation and the economic redemption that Africa needs. And it shifts us from, rightly stated earlier, the place where we've been reliant upon AIDS and other kinds of needs being met through humanitarian agenda. I'm a firm believer that if we advance the economic agenda, if we move the economic to the forefront of the Black agenda and the Africa agenda, we will obviously find that all of the social issues will automatically address themselves. So I just want to speak to the energy of the people, the excitement of the people. The trip was purely positive. There's really nothing negative that we can really say about the trip. We got there, we were greatly welcomed, and all of the agencies that have supported and worked with us did just what they were supposed to do, and the group is now begging us to go back next year. So we're excited about what Ghana holds for the future, and certainly we're excited about the Africa journey forward.
Well, let me follow it up again with you, Reverend Dillon. What is the interest of these people you took there in terms of business engagement and investing in sectors in the Ghanaian economy?
Well, I think there are some specific things that we want to speak to. Very, very clearly, when we look and consider the fact that blacks in North America control a spending power in excess of $2 trillion. That is about 350 to $400 billion more than the GDP for the entire country of Canada. So blacks in North America have tremendous power. When we add blacks in South America, we're adding maybe another 2.3 or so trillion to that. So here goes blacks in the Americas with a buying power in excess of $4 trillion. At the end of the day, where are we spending that $4 trillion? How many African products are we buying? So at the end of the day, we want to begin to create the dynamics where more African products are being sold on the shelves of black communities all across these United States of America and elsewhere. So we're looking to begin to pair up marketers in the U.S. with agriculturists, with technologists, with manufacturers. How do we, challenge more Africans in America to set up manufacturing operations on the continent? How do we take agriculture and create in between agriculture and distribution distribution in the United States, agro-processing, and how do we create the dynamics of economic partnership between businesses here in the U.S. and businesses in Ghana, really working together to expand this. At the forum we talked about yesterday, there was a display of just a variety of Ghanaian products. But unfortunately, not very many blacks in these United States of America are selling those products. In fact, I hardly think any blacks are selling those products. Look at gold in Ghana. Look at diamond in Southern Africa. Look at oil and oil reserve and gas and petrol. Unfortunately, I as a black man can't really journey into a gas station in America and go buy petrol that I can legitimately say is coming from a black-owned company on the continent. And there are several black-owned companies on the continent that sell petrol. So I really want us to begin to create the dynamics of, making smaller this African economy and begin to globalize the African economy by challenging Africans in America to begin to create greater partnerships with Africans in Ghana and vice versa. Black Africans in Ghana creating, partnerships with Africans in the United States of America, so we can begin to buy from ourselves. I keep saying I want to walk into my supermarkets and be able to buy, Dangote rice and pasta and flour that is available in Africa. I want to go buy gas and other products that I know are coming out of Africa. So we're really beginning to create these dynamics. We think it's an important journey going forward, and that's why for us this cannot just be a cultural experience. It cannot just be a ceremonial experience. Yes, the Bible did say that a people will be estranged in a foreign land, a strange land with a language they know not, where they will be enslaved and entrapped for 400 years. But after 400 years they shall come away with great wealth. So we're now in the season of that coming away. It's clear, Genesis chapter 15, verse 13 and 14. So we're seeing right now the fulfillment of the scripture, but we must understand, biblically speaking and theologically speaking, that when we talk about a coming up, when we talk about a revival,
I understand where you're coming from, Reverend Dillon.
It's a journey. It's not just
I understand where you're coming from, Reverend Dillon. But let me come to you, Mr. Ambassador. What is your reaction to his statement about business engagement and those he took and other interests, those who want to go and invest in Ghana?
Well, I think in a way that has been our agenda. In fact, the whole issue of the year of return, it has a lot to do with forging the kind of relationship that will result in a certain kind of economic activity between the two sides. And in fact, I usually, since he was quoting a bit of the Bible, I usually remind the African Americans that I meet that Ghana sits on the prime meridian, and Ghana again is just about 4 degrees to the north of the equator. So if you stood at that junction of the meeting of the equator and the prime meridian, whichever direction you move in, Ghana is going to be the first country that you hit. So especially for Christians like the Reverend and other people, they probably have to come to the conclusion that when God was doing the business, he was standing on Ghanaian soil. And for that matter, if you are looking at business, you can't have a better place to start. And in fact, from what even he has said over a short visit to Ghana, obviously the business opportunities are more than one could even fathom. It just so happens that now we are asking that African Americans in particular should take an interest in this country that basically is a big diamond, a little sort of dirty, and we want to wash it, polish it, and use it. And we would want to do that in concert, with our black American, brothers and sisters. And the drive, therefore, that we have is basically telling, people that yes, whatever it is that you are talking about, we have a basis for it. What we are looking for may be going to be a certain kind of know-how and a certain injection of serious capital into the Ghanaian economy for us to have the kind of takeoff that obviously would have to be very beneficial to everybody. And one has to be reminded of the fact that the headquarters of the Africa single market is going to be in Ghana. So whatever connectivity that anybody needs by way of trade, trade and industry and whatnot on the continent, whatever connectivity that anybody needs with regard to the flow of capital, probably the entry point is going to be Ghana. So to a large extent, we are up and running. We want to run faster, and we want to run in such a way that always thinking about the fact that industry in particular has always been developed on the basis of planned obsolescence. It means that we don't even have to run a catch-up race. We have to run more or less a hop-ahead race. Because, again, I usually say that, look at motor cars. Now people are into driverless vehicles and whatnot. And with that kind of development, I'm quite sure that after a couple of decades, most of the vehicles we would be driving on the continent would be technically obsolete. And therefore, it is possible that the vehicles that I have, if I wanted to, go to my home village and I'm therefore using one of these newfangled driverless ones, before you know it, the vehicle is telling you on the dashboard that, oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't designed for this kind of road and therefore I'm not going again. Which basically means we need, for instance, massive investment in infrastructure, roads, railways, and whatnot. So to a certain extent, our drive is that there are limitless opportunities on the continent. And we just want people to come and take or to participate in the development of whatever it is that we aim to do, because it is bound to be profitable. And through that, we weld the communities together. Because whichever way you look at it, irrespective of what country you come from or how you describe yourself, I think somebody is quoted to have said that as long as you are black, you are African. Right. And I do believe that, you see, those who are on this side of the pond, we as brothers and sisters consider them to be sitting on somebody else's front porch elsewhere. And the fact is, you can't sit on somebody else's front porch and watch your house burn, because after the fire, the owner of the front porch may come and ask you, oh, but when are you going home? Knowing very well you don't have a home to go to. So we are asking that come and take a stake in your home, so that at least at any point in time, you have a magnificent alternative.
Well, you are tuned in to Straight Talk Africa. We'll have more of our discussion in a moment after a short break. We appreciate all of the audience feedback. Straight Talk Africa streams live every Wednesday on Facebook. You can watch our show there and leave a comment. Now let's look at what's on tap for next week's program.
On the next Straight Talk Africa, Nnamdi Kanu, the leader of the indigenous people of Biafra, talks about the efforts and challenges to secede from Nigeria. The struggle for independence on the next Straight Talk Africa.
Today we are talking about the year of return. Ghana is inviting the global African family home. Joining me today in Washington is Barfour Adjei Barwuah, Ghana's ambassador to the United States. And from New York, we are joined by Reverend Dillon, co-convener of the Door of Our Return Foundation, an initiative to connect African Americans with their country of origin. Now, let me come to you, Ambassador. Talking about the year of return, the president made a promise of one district, one factory. He also talked about free SHS, or secondary school education, which is currently ongoing. Some people are saying they are not feeling the promise and the implementation of the policies. How do you react to such reaction coming from Ghanaians?
Well, it seems to me that there are times when people expect that if it's going to rain, it should rain and produce about 76 inches of rain. It usually wouldn't happen that way. It might even be excessive. But if, for example, we take the bit of a free SHS, yeah, the policy is being implemented. And the fact is, the number of people who have entered secondary school within that short period that this president has been in office obviously has been excessive enough for it to have become necessary for us to run a double stream in the education system. But then at the moment, infrastructure is proceeding in such a way that gradually, even the issue of the double stream, is receding. And this one is not very new, because when I was going to middle school in my time, my school had not the building of my school had not been completed. So for the first term, I was in a class that was double streaming with another class, some other area of Kumasi. And it worked very well. But now, even that is being reduced. And then, of course, it has given the opportunity for most people who probably would not have gone into secondary school because of other financial difficulties or what have you, to have access to secondary school. And the underlying, intent is that the country is committed to a position where the nation owes every Ghanaian child a certain level of education between the ages of 0 and 18. Because we have to develop the workforce of the future. Right. And that one depends on the kind of education we give, the curriculum that we put in and all that. So even though it has been initially expensive, for us, we are going ahead with it, and we are being very successful, because we do believe that the future of the country rests to a large extent on the quality and the type of workforce that we have. So that one, I think most of us are very happy with, and it's a program that obviously we are trying to pursue as a matter of urgency, and therefore sometimes it even calls for some bits of budget shifts to be able to cope with it. The other issue that you mentioned, that one has to do with
the one district, one factory.
One district, one factory. You see, we are technically a small country, just about the size of Great Britain. The population we have, even though not excessive, there seems to have been a certain development of massive urbanization in the country. And we have a particularly fertile country anyway. And if you bring everybody into the urban areas, coping with social services, providing employment, urban transportation, they all become very difficult issues to handle. So the idea of the one district, one factory is to try and provide employment avenues across board so that somebody doesn't have to leave Tamale or Nakpanduri or Bekwai or some to come to Accra for a job. Because if the jobs are that decently distributed, it helps with the economy. It helps with even taking care of items like, health care and whatnot. But where you have excessively massive concentrations in cities, it is difficult, to cope. Housing, health infrastructure, and, other associated social services are always going to be seriously inadequate because of the pressures on them. So what we are trying to do is to use that, policy to try to, redirect population, to try to redistribute population so that at least the country would provide the best that it can for every single individual who makes the effort, to provide for himself and his family and whatnot. And we are being successful.
Good. Reverend Dillon, before I come to you, Ms. Ambassador, some of the criticisms I hear is that with the year of return, the locals are not being involved. It appears that the concentration is on those in the diaspora, and that if the government perhaps might engage the local population, it will be better served since it will improve their daily lives, and the objective for which the government put this in place will be better realized. What is your reaction to that?
No, I don't think anybody could very seriously suggest that the locals are not being involved. The locals, if anybody said the locals are not being involved, I suspect it has to do with the fact that the locals at the moment are not the travelers into the country. So the idea is to forge a certain kind of relationships, a certain interplay of ideas and hopes and such between the African Americans and the locals. And one has to recognize the fact that you cannot, as it were, sound or spread the word that, hey, all you locals go and relate with the African Americans who are coming. But of course, a lot of them will take the cue and try to relate, because after all, when the visitors are looking for economic opportunities, it includes the availability of people to do the job. It includes staffing. So I don't suppose it's a matter of the locals not being included, but it's going to have the necessity to help direct local labor to those areas where investments are going. And I think that one, again, we are trying to do. And I'm quite sure that even an organization like the Trade Union Congress will have an interest in, teasing out those areas of, budding population opportunities and employment opportunities, and then try to, get people to stream into those areas. Maybe, the clarion call for people to visit Ghana was not based in Ghana herself, because that isn't the issue. The issue is getting people on the outside to come in and relate. And when you relate in Ghana, it's easy, because Ghanaians are so very welcoming. And I usually tell those who are going to Ghana that, look, when you go to Ghana, don't allow the Ghanaians to prevent you from doing the one thing a visitor should do, that is spend money. Because the Ghanaians tend to be so nice that, the things that people pay for elsewhere, the average Ghanaian, oh, it's all right. No, don't allow them to say it's all right. Pay something into the economy, because that is what is going to help bubble up, with respect to making it even more attractive for people to invest in us.
Well, before I go to Dillon,
sure.
I would want you to address the issue of tax incentives, because people have expressed concern that when they are interested in going to parts of Africa, the tax incentives are not there. There are certain bottlenecks that hamper the progress or undermine their efforts to invest. So let me go to Dillon, and then I'll come to you to address that. Reverend Dillon, talk to me. There are sometimes issues of cultural shock when people travel to Africa. Expectations sometimes are not met. How do you manage those expectations?
I think we have some of the areas of concern that travelers usually have going to Africa. Is medical. What kind of do we need? Yellow fever shots? Do we need this? Do we need the other? I think what I am inspired about with the group that made the journey is that this was a conscious group. So there was no culture shock. We fitted perfectly amongst our people, and I think that is important to understand. For us, I think it's important just to speak to the power of the diaspora, because we have a tendency sometimes to overlook this, and I think, again, this is an area for which Ghana must be commended, because there was just a strong focus on how do we engage the diaspora. I think that's a part of the journey for the next decade as we look to 2020, that there must be a greater engagement with the African diaspora. There must first be a liberation, a mental liberation from the concept or the thinking that the diaspora is only those who in the U.S. we would refer to as continental Africans, those who are first, second generation African immigrants to the United States. The fact of the matter is that those who've been the journey 400 years, 500, 600 years, because as we all know, the transatlantic slave trade started way before that first documented ship took 20 and odd Africans from arguably Angola to what is now Jamestown in Virginia. This journey has existed way before then. But I think it's important, and we ended, by the way, our journey. We've been to a number of countries, Ghana, then Senegal, South Africa. But particularly, we went to the Pan-African Parliament, and for the first time in the history of the Pan-African Parliament, there was a joint session of the Pan-African Parliament with Africans in the diaspora. And there was quite a number of areas that were covered, and one is to embrace the diaspora, the broader diaspora, to give the diaspora a seat on at the table as it relates to the Pan-African Parliament, to establish a diaspora desk at the Pan-African Parliament, so that indeed we can begin to see the journey for Africans' economic liberation. And I believe strongly, when we look at the rise of South Korea and their economy, we look at Israel and their economy, we look at other countries and their economy, we know that most of the European economies are built on the Europeans who journeyed out of Europe and were in Africa, oftentimes, pulling unfairly and illegally the resources out. The journey for us in the diaspora must now to understand the need to connect, and those on the continent, the leadership on the continent, all of the African countries must greater embrace the diaspora. So when we're looking for contracts, we're looking to build roads, we're looking for infrastructure development, we have to also now look at businesses within the broader diaspora, because in the end, that is the way to empower and help to liberate, economically liberate Africa. I know if I say liberate, you guys may think Africa is free, but I believe that being politically free and economically enslaved is to be mentally enslaved.
Let me come to you, Ambassador. Sure. What makes Ghana uniquely centered to attract investors vis-a-vis the year of return? Because the narrative is that in Africa, nothing works. The tax incentives are not there, people are not attracted enough, structures are not there. What makes Ghana different?
Well, Ghana is different, but anyway, may I say that, you know, one cannot make a sweeping statement that in Africa, you know, nothing works. No, Ghana is different in the sense that, one, for instance, with us, dependent on the area that we are investing in, there are certain kinds of incentives that we provide. Sometimes a tax-free holiday for a certain kind of period. Sometimes a certain allowances with regard to the types of labor that you can bring in. And then, of course, other kinds of, you know, taxation that may well be waived for a new entrant into the economy to make sure that at least the enterprise survives. So we do have, you know, very defined, you know, support systems insofar as incentives are concerned. I think probably what one will have to try to recognize, and I think Reverend made a certain side allusion to it. The fact is, people should not go into Ghana or into Africa with a certain mentality that we are going to liberate these people. What Africa is calling for is a certain kind of honest, bona fide attempt by anybody to put an investment into, you know, any of the countries in the expectation that, you know, there will be a very respectable return. So in a way, all of us are, you know, we've woken up to the fact that somehow or the other, we ought to maybe try as much as possible to move away from the fact. Because for me, I believe, for instance, that after so many years of independence, we should, you know, probably even forget that we went into this colonial period. Let's say that, okay, we are starting from a tabula rasa. We are basically starting afresh. So how do we do it? And I think this is where the interface between us and, you know, black Americans would have to be, you know, couched, because we are looking at a certain mutuality of interest. We are looking at two communities bound by, you know, nature or what have you, history or what have you, to do what is good for both communities. And therefore, we cannot have too many reservations. And I'm hoping that those who would want to invest are not going to, as it were, develop some kind of outlandish and difficult to implement, as it were, advantages or facilities and expect the countries to deliver, you know, on those. I think the same basic tenets of economic investment and whatnot, which pertains everywhere, should be also advanced on the African continent. The advantage that, you know, African Americans would have is that whichever way we look at it, they are kinsmen. And therefore, if there are any, you know, sort of subtle, you know, advantages that could be, you know, put some people's way, dependent on the industry or what have you that they are in, of course, it will be in the best interest of everybody for one to advance that.
Well, so let me ask you this briefly, Ambassador. A lot of these people who are coming from the diaspora are exposed to good health care, sure. Infrastructure. You talked about infrastructure and the investment your administration is making. How do you handle such expectations? Because as the Reverend Dillon was saying, some people will think that, well, I need some shots because of the malaria, yellow fever, and all that stuff. How do you manage such expectations, and how do you resolve these concerns?
Well, as for the shots and such, insofar as they are travelers, in a lot of countries, they are supposed to be required. In certain cases, nobody requires them because the risk in certain areas is supposed to be non-existent or what have you. But then also, I think one issue that, you know, revolves around that is that I hope that most people, and in this particular case, most of our brothers and sisters, you know, going to Ghana, I don't expect that they should be, you know, looking for, you know, a McDonald's in a town of, you know, 24 people, or they would want to rush down to some grocery shop, down the road and do this or do that. Because there is always going to be a certain kind of either sweetness or adventure in trying to see the environment you are in and relate. In fact, I just read this WhatsApp from somebody yesterday about this man who was talking about the wonderful time he's having. And then he pauses and says, for all those black Americans who want to come, he is giving them this warning, and it's very serious warning. If they come to Ghana and they spend more than a certain period of time, they are going to probably swear that they won't come back to America. So he's giving them that warning. Now that for me is an index of what is it that there could be. So I think in a way, a lot of people are also going to need a certain level of acculturation. And that one is also going to be very important for business, because the process of adjustment in itself is going to create avenues for investment. And I would expect that African Americans would also be looking at that. Just as I expect Ghanaians to be also looking at that and decide on the kinds of services that they can put on the market in order to contain the demands and wishes of those people who have come into the country to help invest.
Reverend Dillon, 30 seconds, let me come to you. When people want to invest, they look at political stability, they look at other indices in the country. What did you see when you went to Ghana and other parts of Africa? Briefly. Well,
I think that very clearly Africa is moving in the direction of political stability. We saw stability in Ghana, obviously. We saw stability in Senegal, and certainly we saw stability in South Africa as well. I think just a couple of critical points that I want to just bring to the conversation as we're talking about health, for instance. We've already put in place, and our delegation was very strategic. People like Dr. Julius Garvey, we've put together a health team of medical doctors, and again, not to go to do humanitarian work, but to look at how we build hospital, how we build a stronger health infrastructure, for the purpose of business growth and business development as others are doing. Secondly, very quickly, hospitality is another huge area. We have hoteliers and developers. How do we develop more? Because the fact of the matter is, if we're encouraging 1 million African Americans to come and they're staying in hotels and properties that are owned by everyone else, we're not building a strong indigenous Ghanaian economy. So these are just some of the key areas that I think we have to focus on, and government have to play a role to say specifically, how do we help to streamline development so that there's black-owned hotels, there are black-owned hospitals, and other kind of operations, both on the business and business development side, as well as on the not-for-profit and the social services side as well.
Well, thank you. Ambassador, 15 seconds. What's your message to those people who want to go to Ghana?
Well, as the Ghanaian slogan will be at the airport, Akwaba, welcome. We would want you to come, enjoy yourself. In the process, make sure that you open your eyes and your mind and decide to put good investment into Ghana.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
On that note, our guests today were Ghanaian Ambassador Barfour Adjei Barwuah and Reverend Dennis Dillon. Thanks to our audience for tuning in, and please join us again next Wednesday for another edition of Straight Talk Africa. Good evening.